Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the March meeting of the New York chapter of Mystery Writers of America. This is part of our Spotlight series. We will be focusing tonight on two members, Diana Xarissa and Elle Hartford, who will have a chance to showcase their work. We are recording, and this will be available later on the chapter YouTube channel. Okay, my name is Gary Earl Ross. I'm your host. Let's get going. Diana?
So I'm going to put my glasses on so I can read my notes. I'm just going to give you a very quick overview of who I am and what I write. We were talking before about how we got started, and I'm one of those people who's always written. But my publishing journey started in 2013. My husband had heard about this new indie author thing, and he said, "Why don't you try that?" So I sort of emptied out my metaphorical bottom drawer, and I put a bunch of stuff up on Amazon. To crickets, which was not good. So I got to the end of 2013 and I thought, I got to do something different. I'm going to write a cozy mystery, which is my favorite genre to read. So in May 2014, I introduced the world to Aunt Bessie with Aunt Bessie Assumes. Aunt Bessie lives alone on in a cottage on Laxey Beach. Laxey is a town on the Isle of Man, which is a tiny island in the Irish Sea. And Bessie has lived there all of her adult life. She's never married, she's never had children, but she's been something of an honorary auntie to generations of children in Laxey. She's somewhere between free bus pass and telegram from the Queen. And if you press her on her age, she will tell you that she is in the later years of her middle age and then refuse to discuss it any further. Up until Aunt Bessie Assumes, she lived a rather ordinary life. Unfortunately, that particular morning, she finds a dead body on the beach. Because I write alphabetical titles and long series, it was not the last body that poor old Bessie found, but she didn't know that at the time. So that came out in May of 2014. It didn't sell 1 million copies right away. It sold 10 copies on release day at 99 cents, which made me $3.30, and I was thrilled. So what I did was I wrote book 2 as quickly as I could, and then book 3. And by the end of my second year of indie publishing, I'd made $11,000, and I thought, this might actually turn into something. 2015, I started another series, so I was now publishing 8 books a year because Amazon only allowed 90-day pre-orders for indie authors, so I was doing Bessie every 90 days. So I did a second series as well, and by the end of 2015, I was making full-time job money, which meant I could quit job hunting, which was awesome. I work at this full time, which means I write every day. I'm still putting out about a book a year. I've been making full-time job money ever since then. I'm currently writing across 6 different series. I'm still writing about Bessie, bless her. She's had her 26 books in the alphabet, and now she's going through the alphabet again. She's on M, I think, L or M, somewhere in there. So I'm currently writing across 7 different series, but one of them is going to be published by Jaffe Books, which is a UK independent publisher. I just signed a 26-book contract with them for an entire alphabet of series. I have no idea when the first one's going to come out because traditional publishing does not move at the same pace as indie publishing, so we will see, but those books are in process. So that's kind of a quick summary of who I am.
Okay, that sounds good to me. Elle?
Oh, sure. All right. So my story begins in a very similar place where I just was one of those kids who was always writing and making up stories. But I started on the fantasy side of things. And it wasn't until, gosh, I was in college studying something entirely different. My first career was in history and museums. But at the time, I was moving around a lot, I was reading a lot, and I was reading a lot of cozy mysteries. And there finally came a point around like 2018, 2019, when I had a fantasy novel that I had finally worked up the courage to, shop around traditionally to, as querying agents and that sort of thing. And in the meantime, I was like, geez, really like cozy mysteries. Why don't I? And I was like, why can't I try writing one of those? And at first I was really intimidated by mystery plotting, like fantasy plotting, fine. Mystery where you have to do clues and red herrings and stuff. I was like, it was a challenge. But it was also a lot of fun. And so my series, the series that came out of that is cozy mystery, but it's also cozy fantasy. And I know we're not fantasy writers here. So cozy fantasy is an emerging subgenre. It's basically the same idea as cozy mystery, where it is fantasy, not so much on the violence, no sex. Also, it tends to not be about big wars and political intrigue and courts and plots and that sort of thing. It's more day-to-day life. So the two mix together very well. I have had a lot of fun with it. I started out writing short stories about my main character living in a fairy tale town. Her name is Red, like Little Red Riding Hood, and she is an alchemist, which gives her an excellent sort of rational, almost reluctant sleuth approach to mystery, and it's been great fun. The first novel of hers came out 2021. I have it right here. It's Beauty and the Alchemist, because it is a mystery, first and foremost, but it is also a retold fairy tale. So Beauty and the Beast, clearly. And I am also self-published, and that was a really conscious choice on my part. I knew I was familiar with my options, right? Because I had tried querying the fantasy novel, and like I had gotten responses and I had seen how that works. With Red Stories, collectively, the series is called The Alchemical Tales. Because I was doing something a little different from what I had seen other cozy mysteries or even other fantasy writers do, right, with the blending of the genres, and I had a really specific vision. I had thought about it for a while and finally decided, like, okay, self-publishing is the best route for me for this series because I know that I will have the creative control to really make it work. So that was very much a conscious choice, and I don't regret it one bit. We are on book 6, and there's also a couple spin-off series, one that's been around for about a year and one that's in the works. And it's been an excellent experience, not only because of the writing and sharing, being able to share stories with everybody, but also I feel really strongly about sharing with other writers about how self-publishing works and what your options are, because I think even folks who are indie authors don't always realize the full range of options that they have. So for me, it's become a real calling. And I still work part-time in the museum world. COVID wasn't great for us in the museum world, of course, as it wasn't for a lot of people. So I've kind of scaled back on that a lot, and I'm focusing more and more on writing and trying to help other authors as well.
Okay. All right. We'll talk a little about self-publishing, but let's talk about the more traditional stuff there. How do you come up with characters? How do you come up with plots? What inspires you? And those are things I think that writers frequently want to know. What made you say, hey, that's an idea, and then go for it? So we'll flip the order this time. We'll start with you, Elle, and then go to Diana.
Oh boy, I'm not sure I have a great answer. Well, okay, so I will say I don't remember where Red came from. Red, my main character, the alchemist. I don't remember what made me think of that. But I will say that now that she's here and established, and all of the kind of side characters in this world exist now, I find like that is where my inspiration comes from. I'm a very character-driven writer, right? Cozy fantasy and cozy mystery are both very character-focused genres. So for me, the fun comes from thinking, okay, so I have this character. What would she think about this situation, or what does she need to learn and work on and grow? Like, okay, we're at a point, at this point in the series, we have, romantic relationships, friends, who is still like working on their arc, that sort of thing, seeing how the pieces come together and what character is really coming forward in my mind that like, okay, they have a story to tell. That's a big part of my inspiration and just motivation of like continuing to write. Also, the novels, not so much the short stories, but the novels in the Alchemical Tales series are retold fairy tales, like I said. So that's a fun bit of inspiration as well. It gives me a great excuse to collect books on fairy tales and mythology, which then I can kind of look through, okay, the Beauty and the Beast, obviously one of my favorite fairy tales, great inspiration for coming up with a story and how can I put a spin on that. But then finding new fairy tales and being like, ooh, okay. Pinocchio, ooh, obviously there's a con man in there somewhere, like that. So I think I, overall, I think what I'm saying is my inspiration comes just from what I really enjoy.
Okay, I have two questions I will toss out. I think of Pinocchio as a variation on Frankenstein. And those are things that idea of creating the character that can go someplace else is a wonderful thing to do, because it gives you so many possibilities. I tossed that out. Not so much a question, I guess, just a comment. But the second question, and I'll pass that question on to Diana in a minute. Do your characters ever fight you? Resist things that you want them to do?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I'm saying yes very emphatically because I just had that experience, because I had a novella that I really wanted to come out in March. And I was like, okay, I have a rough idea of what should happen and who is involved. And it just wasn't working. The characters just weren't, they weren't doing it. They weren't playing along. And I found once I finally like could make myself sit down and put the stress aside and like all my ideas about deadlines and all these other things going on in my life that I'm worried about, once I could sit down and really listen to the characters, or honestly do something totally different, like go for a walk and let the characters come to me on their own, that's when the clarity came. But a lot of characters not playing along was really me being stressed and like creating friction for myself.
Okay, Diana.
Okay.
I'll leave that question there. You can start where you'd like, talking about your own work and inspirations, but that question about the resistant characters stands. I think it's something that all writers have to deal with at one point or another, where you're thinking, okay, now this character's going to, and the character says, I don't want to. So
Okay, so I'm going to start back with the original question about where my characters come from, because Bessie has a really fun origin story. I think it's fun. I wrote a romance novel called Island Inheritance, and it was an American girl who goes to the Isle of Man because her grandmother's aunt passed away. And I wrote the whole backstory for the grandmother's aunt because she lived on the island in this little cottage on Laxey Beach for her whole life, never married, and she had diaries, and so the American romance main characters reading these diaries, finding out about this woman, and then after I finished it, I decided I wanted to write a romance, and I thought, oh my God, that Bessie would have been the perfect main character for a romance, but she's dead. So what I did was I set the first Bessie book 15 years before the romance. So they're a little, there's, I think we're up to about the year 2001 now. So they're a little bit set back in time, but that was where she came. Like, I fell in love with this character when I wrote her in this romance, when I gave her this whole backstory. And then I was like, I want to know more about her. I'm going to write a whole series for her. What was the second part of the question? Well, where do plots come from, or where do ideas come from? My main inspiration is the money. I'm not gonna lie, but shh, I didn't say that. Um, I get a lot of my plot ideas from book titles, and that's because I write alphabetical book series. So if I'm writing an alphabetical series, and for instance, my Isle of Man Ghostly series, which is a paranormal series also set on the Isle of Man, totally different set of characters. The titles are two words, both start with the same letter, and one is a good thing and one is a bad thing. So we have arrivals and arrests, and boats and bad guys, and cars and cold cases, all the way through. So when you're writing with those kinds of prompts, you've got to come up with a story that ties those together. So like when I got to M, I did marsupials and murder. So you've got your jumping off point right there, right? Because not many people know this, but the Isle of Man has a wild wallaby population because a breeding pair escaped from their wildlife park in the 1970s and were never caught. So there are somewhere between 50 and 500, nobody's exactly sure, wild wallabies in the wetlands on the Isle of Man, which was my jumping off point then for that particular book in the series. Do my characters fight back? You know, I used to think when authors said that, oh yeah, right, you know, you're just saying that, it's all in your head, you're in control. No, you're not. The very first book that I wrote, the Aunt Bessie Assumes, I knew who did it from page 1 all the way up to the last chapter. And then I went, she didn't do it. Oh my God, she didn't do it. Character on page 2 who was supposed to walk in and walk off and never appear again ended up being a major character. I had a police detective who appeared in one scene, was supposed to be the main police detective, and I hated him, so I wrote him out. The characters never do what you want them to do. They're usually, oh, and then I decided that the young police guy was going to date a different woman in every book. It was going to be a bit of comic relief. And then he fell madly in love with the first woman I introduced him to, and I couldn't break them up. So now they're married with 2.5 kids. And, you know, so yeah, you can't, you kind of have to, and the more I write, the less I plot, because I want to just let the story develop how it's going to develop. So I kind of just, I start the story and then I sit back and I wait to see what's going to happen.
Okay. I like that you've gone to create a universe. Universes are big these days. They're in a lot of movies and so forth, but everybody says, well, gee, there's the Marvel universe, the DC universe, may it rest in peace. There's a universe, Agatha Christie has a Christieverse, if you will pay attention to people, because some of the characters interlap, which suggests that Hercule Poirot and Jane Marple inhabit the same universe because they've interacted with some of the same people. So I like what you're doing with that, because in my own work recently, I started doing that. I wrote several plays before I turned to writing novels. Let me change that. I had several plays produced before the novel that was waiting to be produced was published. And so I ended up, my second novel started a mystery series. And as I began to develop it, gee, the prosecutor who was in my second play, which was my most successful play, and it was set in 1960 in Buffalo, I ended up thinking, you know what? why can't his grandson be the district attorney? So I introduced that. It linked the two plays together, or it linked the story and the novel together. And I started thinking the thing that would link me was all my titles would be Nickel City, because that's a nickname for the city of Buffalo, named after the bison head 5-cent piece. But then I started building a universe with characters who come in other places. And when my old publisher was in trouble, I thought, oh, geez, I need to introduce a new character. And I had one of my plays with a detective character. Her name was Maxine Travis. So I transferred her from Syracuse, New York to Buffalo, New York in a lateral transfer. And she became a supporting character in my novel series. But she came back and she was in a play last year. And I'm writing another play about her now. So I like the idea that you're building a universe. Okay. Let me ask you a question that writers do get sometimes. Are there people in your lives, friends and family, who think that your characters are them? Do you hear about that? My brother, one line in a short story. I ought to get some royalties for this because it's something I said to you. It's like, this isn't about you, but what do you think about what people find their ways into your stories or think they do?
For the most part,
Okay, go ahead, Diana.
yeah, a lot of the people that know me in the real world don't actually know what I do. I don't really talk about it a lot. I mean, like mom friends and things like that. Like, my kids are getting older now, so I don't see my mom friends anymore. So, like, since the career's taken off, we just don't really talk about what I do. And the people closest to me don't read my books. My mother reads them, my sister reads them. Neither one of them has ever accused me of putting them in a book. I think most of my characters are sort of conglomerate of many, many people smashed together into one. There's probably more of my mother-in-law in some of the nastier characters than she would want to know, but she's unfortunately no longer with us, so she'll never know that. No, I don't feel like some of my characters are a lot like me. Like I see me in a lot of my characters. Sometimes I wrote a particular in Cars and Cold Cases, my main character who moves to the Isle of Man is trying to learn how to drive on the wrong side of the road while shifting. She's never driven a manual car before, shifting with her left hand on the wrong side of the road. And I wrote very honestly about how hard, like my character found it as hard as I did, because I found it incredibly difficult. And I had some reviews that were like, you're making far too big a deal out of it. It's not that difficult. And I'm like, well, it was for me. Thanks. But yeah, so I think I'm in a lot more of my characters than anybody else is.
Okay. And I can appreciate the last part of your story because we spent about a week driving around the English countryside last summer. And frankly, it was terrifying to play with a car. Tammy did most of the driving. And at one point, she was about to make a turn. She turned into an oncoming lane, and I'm screaming, no, no. Yeah, no, that can be scary. Elle?
Sure. I will definitely agree first and foremost with the characters being conglomerates, right? Little pieces, bits and pieces of people I've known or pieces of me or that sort of thing. So definitely, absolutely in that case. I have I'm in a somewhat similar situation where my fiance is a historian, and like it's a book must be nonfiction or like maybe a biography. I mean, in biography is mostly Varney, but anyway, he needs it to be as dry and boring as possible. So he hasn't actually read my books. He's incredibly supportive, but he hasn't read them. But by the way that I talk about the characters, he has identified, oh, obviously I must be this character in your world. Like, oh, now I'm this one. Why did you do that? So I do still end up getting that question a fair amount. And I will say too, on kind of a more serious note, um, I think that one of the real um, purposes, or one of the really beautiful things about fiction, is how it can help you make sense of, real life, the rest of the world, right? And a lot of fairy tales deal with, different types of abuse, or tragic backstories, that sort of thing. So I have had characters who are dealing with those sorts of like real world issues in a fantasy setting. And I worry sometimes that people will come to me afterward and be like, this tense emotional scene, were you trying to say something to me? um, that has not happened yet, fortunately. But I do, uh, to bring it around more positively, I think it's important to me that characters deal with these kind of like real issues like that, and overcome them with the support of their community, because that's what cozy is all about, I think.
That's also what fiction and literature are all about. I mean, the purpose of fiction, and I don't want to put on my professorial hat here because, like I say, I've been retired 11 years, so I can't push that too much. But the idea behind stories is to teach us how to be human. It's to teach us empathy. And when we miss that, when we have too many characters who are just two-dimensional and they don't have any depth, they don't have any um, real contours, they don't have any real things that make them characters, we lose out. So I agree with you completely that those composite characters we have, I think of necessity, they're a little part of us because we are, as human beings, remarkably complex. And in my own series, my detective, like my son, is an Iraq War veteran who became a cop and then something else, private eye in my world, and not a defense contractor employee in my son's world. And the my detective's godfather is a retired English professor. So there's a little of me in him and a little of me in the character who looks a little like my son, but thinks a lot like me because we're subdividing ourselves as we create characters. And I think that's absolutely necessary. Even when we create characters who are so unlike us, we're subdividing because at heart, I think all writers are actors to a degree. We're putting ourselves inside people. We're imagining the things that make them tick. So, yes. Um, where do you think you're headed as writers? And we'll start with you, Elle, doing the back and forth thing we've done. Where do you think you're heading in terms of your series? Are you leaning towards something that is and I say that my next book is going to be not a novel so much as a collection of short stories for the characters in my detective's world. Some of the stories are written by the people themselves, and some of them are, my narration for him is first person, but a lot of the stories in there are third person stories about other people in that world. Do you see your world expanding? Will you integrate your worlds? I mean, one of my favorite writers is Robert B. Parker, and he gradually integrated his worlds so that so that Jesse Stone um, wound up having a conversation with Spencer and a relationship with Sonny Randall. So all three series, somehow there was an interweaving. Where do you see yourself going that way? Elle?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Um, Definitely, yes. So I have kind of a vague point in mind where I think that the Alchemical Tales series is going to end up, and we have probably 6 more books to go. But I might keep writing after that just because I do really enjoy them very much. But I know that that series will continue on at least for a little while. And I have a couple spin-offs that are set in the same world with kind of overlapping characters, right? One of them is in a different genre, so it's not so much on the mystery side. But I'm just starting one this year that is mystery, kind of like with a slightly more noir feel. Still cozy, so it's not, you know, huge, but it has a little bit more of a almost the character fancies herself a noir heroine, we'll just say that.
Like the genre till we get Warzy.
Right. We'll see where it goes. That series, we're still in short stories, but I have a good feeling about it. We'll see.
Okay.
So yeah, the world absolutely will expand. And I know that at some point in the future I'll be working on other series too. You know, I have fantasy books from way back when still waiting in the wings to be returned to at some point. And I have ideas for mystery series that are not fantasy related, but are actually set in our world that, you know, maybe one day I'll get to. So at this point, all I can say is for sure, all I can say for sure is that I will keep writing and the world will expand.
Good. Yeah, I see that as a great possibility. I met Harlan Ellison many years ago. I was a student and he came to speak at my school. And so a bunch of us gathered around him at the end, and one guy said, "Where do you get your ideas?" "I'm a writer, but I don't have any ideas." And Ellison, in his blunt fashion, said, "You're not a writer. Writers have nothing but ideas." They can't keep their ideas. And that was cold, but it was absolutely true, because you just can't keep up with them. You know, I would tell you about the divorce lawyer who thought that she was the main character in one of my plays, a courtroom drama. But I will say that I've been married a couple times, and I know when I've heard it from two different people that it must be true. "Garrett, huh? You're thinking of the story, aren't you?" "Yes." It happens that way. Diana?
Yeah, so like I said, I'm writing in 7 different series at the minute. They're all alphabetical titles. So the intention is to at least, you know, finish all the way through. I have a bad habit when I finish a series of starting a new series with the same characters. So I don't know. I'm committed for, I think it's 7 years to Joffy to get the whole 26 book series through them. And I'll still be working on some, because some of my series only get 1 or 2 books a year, depending on how popular they are. I have some that aren't cozy. My original series was very traditional cozy. I have a cozy thriller series, which isn't really a genre, but I love it. I have cozies in space, which is a really hard sell, but they're really fun to write. So they only get maybe 1 or 2 books a year, but ideas are everywhere. I have notebooks full of books I'd love to write someday. I try to keep my focus on the books that are providing my income. But in a world where I eventually will retire and have retirement income, hopefully, to live on, I will probably write all of those things that are in all of those notebooks that I don't think are at all commercial or marketable, but they'll be fun to finally write.
I suspect you're going to be like a lot of us. I've got notebooks. I'm at my desk right now. I could pull open drawers. I have notebooks full of ideas, story starts, and other things. And I will be 73 my next birthday. I know there is no way in hell I will live long enough to write all the stuff that's in these notebooks. So let's open it up to commentary and questions from those who are participating. Remember, okay, Doug, your hand is up. Remember, all of you, turn off your mutes. Okay. Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. My question is primarily for you, Diana. How many books a year do you write? And how do you keep it all straight? I mean, you said you're up to 40 books in one of the series?
Something like that. Yeah. I stopped counting a long time ago. I know because I've got a lot of box sets as well, but probably 150-ish books on Amazon now. With including box sets and things like that. I write every day. It's a full-time job for me, so I sit down and I do 5,000 words, typically 5,000 words a day.
Wow.
That takes about 2.5 to 3 hours. It's not, yeah, okay. I've been doing this for a long time, right? I've been writing at that pace for a number of years now. So you get faster the more you exercise that muscle, right? So 5,000 words a day gives me a 50,000 word book in 2 weeks. I work a full calendar year ahead. Everything that I'm going to publish in 2024 is done, has been announced. A lot of them are already with editors. And I'm working on, well, actually, I'm working on Joffy right now. I have one more book to write for Joffy, and then I'm giving them 6 to start. And then I'm going to turn to writing for 2025. That takes the pressure off of me by working a year ahead because I don't do well with deadlines. I don't do well with external deadlines. I do really well when I set my own deadlines. So I have a calendar here with everything I want to publish in 2025 and the dates I have to hit in order to have those books ready for 2025. Like I said, 2024 is done as far as the writing goes.
And in 2026, you might start eating and sleeping.
It's only, like I said, it's only 2.5 to 3 hours a day. Like that still leaves me a lot of day for marketing and all the other jobs you have to do, and also hanging out with my kids and my husband and all the other things. Like it's not actually, the writing time doesn't take up nearly as much as it sounds like when I say I write that much. 3 hours, I can do 5,000 words easily. And usually,
that amazes me. I know Joyce Carol Oates sometimes produces 20 pages a day, and Gabriel Garcia Marquez a page a day. So people say, oh, 1,000 to 2,000 words a day is a good thing, and I try to do about 1,000 words a day. But I am impressed. At the rate you're going to probably surpass Oates and get into John Creasy, Isaac Asimov territory, because each one of them produced over 500 books in the course of a life.
Wow.
Hey,
so the thing for me is I'm used to hanging out with indie authors. I go to a lot of indie author conferences, and 5,000 words a day, it doesn't impress them anymore. Someone like Amanda Lee, I don't know if you know who she is. She writes Cozy and she writes everything. She does 10,000 words before lunch every day. Wow. And yeah, and she's making 7 figures a year. I'm not making 7 figures a year.
Wow.
Maybe if I wrote 10,000 words a day, I could, but I don't want to push myself that hard either. I don't want to burn out. I want to stay at a level that I'm comfortable with, and I'm comfortable where I am right now.
Okay. All right.
So a follow-up question sort of for you and for Elle. Elle, I think you said the more you write, the less you plot. And I was wondering for you, Elle, and for Diana, do you sort of start with the characters and then is that how you're able to rip out the words because they go where they're going to go? It's not like planned out ahead of time?
I'll go first. All right. I find, yes, for me that you know how they say authors, you're either a plotter or a pantser, right? I am definitely in the middle. I don't plot out. I will have like a very vague idea. I might not even know who the murderer is, but I'll know kind of, some big picture points of the plot. And then it's the characters, seeing where they go, and my outline will be like just the chapter title and then like one line what happens in that chapter title, one line. So yeah, so the framework is pretty light, and then it's just playing around with characters, which is fun.
Yeah, my framework is also very light. I usually make a list of characters and how they're all interrelated and how, who's going to die. I don't decide who did it until the very end of the book, usually. Now, I mean, I wrote one where I decided the butler's going to do it. I want to have a book where somebody says the butler did it. So that book, I knew who did it, right, through the whole book. But generally speaking, I don't know. Now, the last one that I wrote that I just finished last couple of weeks ago, I wasn't sure who was dead until the end of the first chapter. So I set the whole scene. I had 4 different people storm out of a meeting, and then the main character and her friends, sorry, they left the meeting and they found the body in the dumpster. And it wasn't until they opened the dumpster that I decided who was in it. So yeah, I mean, and then I had to figure out why he was in there, like who killed him, and bring in all the other characters and all the other suspects and all that good stuff.
Okay. All right.
Thanks.
Vicky, Al, Linda, Robert?
I
I'm
will say,
overwhelmed.
I will say, I see in the chat there's a question about pages to word count, and I just figured, because I have my book right here, I know that Beauty and the Alchemist is about 75,000 words, and it is coming in at 282 pages.
Okay.
Is that what
gives
size
you
is
some
it, though?
context.
Is that 6 by 9 or is that 5 by 8?
5 by 8.
Yeah. Okay. That's, I mean, yeah, my books tend to run around 92,000 words at 6 by 9, and they're roughly 300 pages. And that tells me that that's the way those books work. I do have a couple shorter books that are not part of that series, but that tells me that's about how things work for that. Vicky had a comment earlier about I have a bit of a problem when I find a character is veering into being too much like me. It makes it hard to give her flaws and make mistakes.
I have to be too perfect.
See, I have so many flaws. It's just trying to pick
So
which
do I.
ones
I
to
don't
give
want
my
to put them on
characters.
paper, though. I don't put my flaws up there for everyone to see. So actually, you know, my first novel had a male protagonist, and it's a mystery. So he's the point of view character throughout, and of course that was a challenge, writing a different gender. But in a way, it was much easier than my next novel, which is more of a thriller with multiple points of view, where a woman is the main character. And I have to like consciously think, what can I do to make her, give her more dimension? Because I sort of take for granted my own point of view too much. And I think it's a little harder in a way.
Okay. All right.
Gary, this is Linda.
Hi, Linda.
Hi, how are you? I asked that question about how many pages the book was because I've kind of seen a trend of books, especially cozies, where these books and I'm not saying you guys did it, I'm just saying a trend that I was looking at, was that, you know, there are multiple books, but these books are 150 pages or less a piece, and they're calling them books. And, you know, I mean, I grew up with the traditional definition of books being so many words, novellas being so many words, and so on and so forth. But I have seen this trend amongst indie publishers that put a lot out, but I've noticed that the page count has gone way down, the prices are going way up, and there's some dissatisfaction amongst readers. So when you go to those conferences, the indie conferences, like have they had discussion about that? Like, you know, what's becoming a more common thread or theme or count?
Absolutely. We talk, so I go to 20 books to 50K, which is not 20 books to 50K anymore, but it's a huge indie author conference. And I've actually moderated the Cozy Mystery panel there for the last couple of years. And we talk about word counts. I would never market anything shorter than 50K as a book personally, but I know a lot of indie authors who are turning out 30 to 40K books and selling them for $3, $4, $5.99 and making a really good living off of it. So readers can find that information. It's in the page count on the page, so they don't feel like they're cheating their readers. The readers can get that information if they care. And for readers who write, or for writers who write characters that readers really want to read, maybe the readers don't care and they'll keep buying them anyway. I personally, like I said, I don't write anything shorter than 50K. I do have a novella series, but they are clearly marketed as novellas and they're a lot cheaper. They're I think they're $1.99 at the moment. Yeah, I mean, the trend in cozy has been shorter and shorter. And that's, I don't know, readers don't like, I was doing only 75K. I started a couple of newer series at 50K just to try the length out. And I did not have a single reader comment about the shortness of the books. So my readers at least don't seem to mind that jump. I wouldn't go any shorter personally.
Yeah, in our groups, you know, where we had this, there was a lot of readers that if they're in Kindle Unlimited, they definitely don't mind because, you know, they just go through book. But now that Amazon has raised the prices on Kindle Unlimited, so many authors are concerned because those page numbers and reimbursement has dropped. You know, now they're back to discussion about if you're buying, you know, a book that's 40K, but, you know, it's being charged as the same as a regular book, you know, $5.99, $6.99. I don't know. It just seems like in some of the readers that we talked to that there was starting to be some frustration. So I was just wondering, and I used to follow 20 to 50K. I don't know what the new name of the group is. I followed on Facebook. I'm not able to go to conferences because I work in the medical world and I usually don't have any time off ever. But you know, so I've been following some of that discussion. You know, what is the new name of that group, if you don't mind my asking, or did they rebrand themselves?
So 20 Books to 50K still exists as a Facebook group, and they'll still be doing some conferences. The actual conference in Vegas is now called Author Nation, but they do not have a Facebook group for Author Nation yet. Anyway, it's a bit they're still sorting it all out. You can buy tickets for the conference now, and they post quite a lot about speakers and vendors and things like that are coming to the conference. But they haven't yet set up a group for people to actually talk. They're trying some different things. I don't know if you're familiar with Joe Solari.
Yeah, I know the name. And Author Nation used to be an indie publishing house years ago, like 10, 12 years ago. That was one of the first. I seem to remember that. I mean, I never had dealings with them, but I seem to remember them in conjunction with Ex Libris and things like that. So it's funny that you say that because I wonder if that was increasing or if that had something to do with that. I don't know. But anyway.
He had a vote for the name and that was the name that won. So I don't know. I don't know. But anyways, he's the one who's behind the conference now. He'll be running the conference, his organization. So, but Craig will still be there. Craig Martell, who started the conferences in the first place.
Right. And I have one other question. What is that background? Where's that background picture of yours?
My backyard. No, that's Versailles.
Okay. There's a place at Hershey Gardens that looks very similar, so I was just curious.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My daughter and I went to Paris a couple years ago. That's Versailles.
I'm sorry.
Never been there either, but thank you.
Elle, what's the attraction for fairy tales, Keith?
Good question. I've always liked them. Even as a kid, I would collect. I had like anthologies of fairy tales that I would read over and over. Actually, I think especially like Greek mythology when I was little. And I'm trying to think why.
Well, aren't
I'm
they
not
eternal stories? The reason that they've
Right.
lasted so long is because they are typify the way that people interact with each other. I mean, they're symbolic. They have a lot of symbolic power, I think.
I will say, yeah, the symbolism, I will say, is very fun to play with. I in particular, just because of my style, I have so much fun subverting fairy tale rules in my books. Each one is a retold fairy tale, so like you have characters that you know are going to be present, and I derive much pleasure from interpreting the characters in new ways, you know, making them an unexpected giving them an unexpected career or position in the story, or swapping gender, that sort of thing. I find very fun. And because of that symbolism and kind of the timelessness of the story, I find they also do translate to crime and mystery really well. It's and maybe it is especially because I was a little bit you know, I was a little nervous at first about like how to plot a mystery and like how to decide what's going to make someone kill someone else, you know, but having the fairy tales there as kind of a prompt was very helpful, and it's a very rich source of inspiration for me.
I'm going to ask you a boomer question. Okay? You're
Sure.
And I don't mean that to sound disparaging.
No.
Facebook page today, I put a question. I called it a boomer question. Who would you send to the cornfield? Okay. Now I'm waiting to see who gets that.
Are we talking Field of Dreams?
No, Jerome Bixby short story. It's good, done on the Twilight Zone, where Billy had the power to send people away if they got on his nerves. He, as a little boy, sent them to the cornfield. It's actually a classic horror story. I'm going to ask you another boomer question. Have you heard the term fractured fairy tales?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, because that, I used to, when I was a kid and I watched Rocky and Bullwinkle, I used to love the fractured fairy tales because my mother read us lots of fairy tales, and we had books around that she read from. And I used to love what they would do with those. So I can see the attraction in playing around with that sort of thing.
Yeah. It's the idea of taking something old and respecting it, but also like seeing it with fresh eyes. And having said that, I will also admit, so I said I studied history. I also studied like archaeology and worked in museums as an interpreter. And as I saw it, my whole role there was trying to connect people with the past. So I think given that context, it's probably less surprising that I would want to rewrite old stories.
No, that's perfectly fine. That's one of those things that the circle of literacy is broad, and you're contributing. We're all contributing to that one way or another with stories, because my daughter has a food photography business in Atlanta, a very successful one. And I was talking to her on the phone the other day, and I said, you know, I think I might want to become an influencer. She said, what do you mean, Dad? You get that little bit of concern. I said, because I realize I've probably read 4,000 or 5,000 books. I read books all the time. I've seen tons of movies, tons of plays, read thousands of short stories, and I remember so many things. I could be a story influencer, the story whisperer, telling people a story they might want to find. And she said, that's
I like
not a bad
that.
idea, number one. And number two, sounds just like you. So, okay, we're close to the end here. I want to ask any final questions, comments from anyone.
Can I just say, Elle, my degree is, well, I have my undergrad degree is in history, and my master's degree is in Manx studies, which is the study of the Isle of Man. And I did a ton of archaeology when I was there, in addition to
Nice.
studying the history of the island. So yeah, it's
Very
a great
cool.
background for a writer, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I don't necessarily draw on like the actual facts of history, but I think the skills that you learn being a historian are very translatable to writing for sure.
There's no one there to say you Polish archaeology. Anyone else?
I just say it's great session. Thanks. And
Both.
I think Fairy tales are cool because they typically have a moral. They're for children originally anyway. And of course, fiction, you learn through experience, right? So in any fiction, you're kind of learning lessons, but in adult fiction, the lessons aren't always that clear. And so I think that's, and again, if you've read, and I'm sure you have, like the original Grimm's stories,
Oh, yes.
I mean, they are
Yeah.
I used to do that with my students. I would say, yeah, and about that glass slipper, as it was really fur, there was a translation problem. Said, and in terms of it fitting, I said, one of the stepsisters cut off her toes and the other cut off her heel to try to make the slippers fit. And my students are like, what? They're looking horrified. One of the things I miss about teaching, but thank you all for taking part in this tonight. This was a very fun session. I hope you all have a pleasant evening, and we will see you next month with the next crime craft. And the question then is, how do we steal an election? And it's not intended to be political, but it's intended to point out that writers have ideas. I mean, frankly, I think all of us here should be on panels for the FBI, the CIA, NSA. We should be on panels where we talk about possibilities. When 9/11 happened, I heard several people say, who would have thought that, planes could be used as a weapon? I'm thinking, did you not read Tom Clancy? Did you miss the movie Executive Action? Have you never read Ian Fleming? Because writers think up crazy shit like that all the time, and writers need to be there. So I want to have a session of how crazy we can get as writers. And the idea is, how do we steal an election? And we just go from there to see what happens. So certainly join us all next month.
all right. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night. I'm going to end the session now, and you all have a good night. I'm going to have some dinner. Take care.
Good night.
Night.